disclaimer, all rankings and number of players committed will change from the time of this recording. So if this doesn't match up with what the rankings are now, it's because they were different at the time of recording. Alright, let's get into this. Alright guys, with the month of June approaching, that's when college football recruiting really takes off. It's during the summer when a lot of teams get most of their commits. So what I decided to do was to go through the rankings and talk about each of the Power 5 conferences. So the ACC, Big 12, Big 10, Pac-12, and the SEC. Go through their rankings and talk about what each team has to do in order to have a strong summer. ACC is the first conference up. We're going to go from best to worst. The top recruiting class in the ACC, and the top recruiting class all around is Clemson. Now let's just talk about this for a second. Dabo Swinney has done a great job at Clemson. He's gotten them to the point where they can not only compete for national championships, but they can win national championships. And Clemson's been even better at recruiting. They are one of the best recruiting schools in the country. And it just shows with this recruiting class right here. Not only are they at the top right now, but they have a 95 average rating. For those of you that don't know, a 95 average rating on 24/7 Sports, that is a top 100 recruit. They are recruiting top 100 kids as their average. You don't see that at all. And not only that, but they have the top dual threat quarterback in DJU from California. Not going to try to pronounce his last name. It's a tough last name to pronounce, and I'm not good at pronunciations. And Brian Breezy out of Maryland, who a lot of places have as a top player overall. So the top dual threat quarterback and the top player overall, that's a pretty good class on its own. But not only that, they have the top player in Maryland, Georgia, and Florida, and the number 2 player in California, Florida, and South Carolina. They have the number 1 player in 3 states and the number 2 player in another 3 states. That just doesn't happen. So what does Clemson have to do to keep these kids? Just keep winning. And with Trevor Lawrence and the bunch of stars that they have on their team, that is not going to be a problem. Number 2 is Miami's 15-man class, and they're also ranked number 4 nationally. So the ACC's got 2 of the top 5 recruiting classes at this moment. In Miami, this is a little surprising because they're transitioning from Mark Richt to Manny Diaz. However, Manny Diaz was there last year, so it's probably easy for him to pick up where Rick left off because he was on the coaching staff last year. But anytime a school is transitioning, it is a little tough for recruiting, but the fact that they got a 15-man class with an 89 ranking, and an 89 ranking, that's borderline 4-star, 3-star. That's a very good ranking. That is very good. So really, what does Miami have to do in order to keep these kids? Well, they have to have a really good season. Diaz has to show that he was the right man for the job for Miami right away. And also, they kind of have a small senior class, so it might not be a big recruiting class. And the big part is they got to keep these Florida kids at home. Remember, Florida is one of the big football factories when it comes to college football. They have a lot of really good players, have a lot of highly ranked kids. It's one of the states where everybody goes to, where they want to find kids, because everybody's going to find a kid there. They're doing a pretty good job with that, because 9 out of their 10 4-star kids are from the state of Florida, so they're not doing a bad job when it comes to keeping some of these kids at home. But in order to keep this class going, they have to have results on the field. They have to do something good on the field this year. Number 3 class is Florida State's 12-man class, which is number 8 overall. Now, Florida State, they're in the same boat as Miami. They have got to have a good season because they had a terrible season last year, and yet they still have the 8th overall class. That's because they've been one of the best teams in college football during this time period, and they just want to show that this was not a sign of things to come. This was just a fluke. And you can't sell that on kids right away. And the same thing as Miami, you got to keep these kids at home, which is pretty good because only one guy out of this class that Florida State has is from out of state. And one more thing with Florida State, they got to get quarterbacks. They already have one in this class. Look for them to try to get another one because they went 2 straight seasons without getting a quarterback in their recruiting class. Okay, 2 surprises coming up. One is North Carolina's 13-man class, which is ranked 9th overall. Matt Brown took the job at North Carolina, and he immediately became an instant recruiter for them, and they've done a really good job. They have an 87 ranking, and for those of you that don't know, that's what most of these teams are based off. These mid to high 3-star players that end up becoming multiple year starters for them, and they end up becoming some of the best players on the team and some of the best leaders on the team. Really, to me, this is the biggest surprise in the ACC because North Carolina didn't have a good season last year, and yet Mac Brown is killing it on the recruiting track. He did a really good job putting the staff together, putting these recruiters together, and getting these kids to believe in them. But again, like Miami, like Florida State, they got to get results on the field. They want to keep these kids. And also, expect a big class from them for two reasons. One, they got to have a big senior class, so they have to reload those guys. And another thing, I mean, he's a new head coach. And you tend to get a lot of transfers your first year when you have a new head coach. So do expect North Carolina to take a big class this year. But right now, they're off to a great start. And so is Georgia Tech with their new head coach. They have a 12-man class that's ranked 12th overall. And they have an 86 ranking. That's really good. Again, those mid to high 3-star kids, that's what these classes are made of. And another team that's going to be looking to take a big class because they are transitioning from the triple option to a completely different offense. The triple option requires just a different skill set of players than Collins is looking for right now. And they started that transition already. So you're going to see these kids, especially on the offensive side of the ball, that were recruited to run the triple option. These kids probably going to leave after the season or even before the season starts because this offense was not made for them. This was not what they were recruited for. Right now, Georgia Tech is off to a good start. But again, another team that has to have results on the field. They want to keep this recruiting class together. It's not just about what you're selling them. It's also about what you're putting out on the field. Outside the top 5 is NC State's 8-man class that's ranked 22nd overall. NC State, they got an 86 rank. It's normally what they do. They go for that mid 3-star ranking, but they end up putting good teams on the field because they are good at developing players. Now really what they're going to have to do, they have to find secondary and they have to find defensive linemen. They have seniors that are going to leave those, and they're kind of low on those numbers. So they have to be able to find defensive linemen and secondary players that are going to fit what they want to do. And also for NC State, and this is true for any other mid-power 5 team, 5 players are going to be passed over by the Blue Bloods. If you get off by a Blue Blood, it means you're talented. However, you weren't really high on that list, and that's when these mid-power 5 teams come in, take them, and turn them into some of the best players on their team. It happens a lot, and when it does happen, a lot of times these players, they're going to end up being great players and just going to be developed so well. So NC State and all the other mid-power 5 teams in the ACC and all across the country, they're going to be looking for these ultra-talented kids that are just passed over because they just weren't high on the list. Wake Forest 9-man class is pretty interesting. It's ranked 27th overall, but it's not going to be that high when it's all said and done. They got an 83 average ranking. That's kind of a lower 3-star, but that's what they normally do. They just find developmental players that are going to take a few years to develop, but when they are developed right, they end up becoming some of the best players on their team. So they're going for developmental players, and they're also going for depth. That's what Wake Forest does. And when it works for them, it works for them. Up next is Boston College 7-man class. That's ranked 32nd overall. This one's pretty interesting. The rankings are all over the place from a 92 to a 78. And that's what they do. They take some blue chips, able to get some, and then they also take some flyers. That's why they have their 84 ranking. But it works for them. They've had some really good seasons in the past, and that's because they're good at developing their players. Now, Boston College, they're not going to recruit on a national level. They're never going to be a team that's just full of blue chip players, but they will get 1 or 2 every recruiting class and then find some developmental players. And they're doing a good job of that so far. Up next is Duke's 6-man class that's 34th overall. This one's another interesting one. They're at an 85. Now, like Boston College, like Wake Forest, they're going to go for guys that fit the team, and some guys that are underrated. Some of these kids are going to be underrated because they don't go to big schools, or they don't go to camps, or they're just overshadowed by other players on their team. It's what happens. But when that does happen, these mid-level Power 5 teams, they come in, they take them, they develop them, and they become really good players. And also with Duke, they got some needs that they got to take care of during this recruiting class. One such thing as linebackers. They're going to need some linebackers come the 2020 season. So it's a good idea to start looking at this linebacker class and seeing who can be a good fit for them. And also in the secondary, again, find some players that are going to fit, bring them along, and get them on your team. Alright, so these last 5 are going to be rather quick because they're smaller classes and we just don't know too much about what these teams are going to do. We can only speculate at this point. Alright, so we're going to start with Virginia's 4-man class, which is ranked 48th overall, and it's an 86 average, which is pretty good. That's a pretty good start, But really what they're going to have to do, they have to have results on the field. And this could be a smaller class because they don't have a big senior class. And it's just not a lot of needs at this point. And I'm also looking for them to take more mid 3-star kids because that's really what they can do right now. Just find underrated kids, just find kids that have been passed over. That's what they can do. Except for this Virginia Tech's 4-man class, 57th overall. Now it's not going to be this low when it's all said and done. They have an 84 average right now. That's going to go up. And right now I think they're just identifying players that they want. Now I was talking about Virginia having a small senior class. Virginia Tech only has 7 seniors on their roster. So they're not going to take a big class. Really what they're going to have to do, they're just going to have to identify players that they want, that they really want, and go for them. Just try to find some depth players at this point. Like I said, not a big senior class. Louisville's 3-man class is up next. They're ranked 71st overall. And Louisville is already behind the 8 ball. They were 2-10 last year, and they have a new head coach. Well, the last two don't have a big senior class. Louisville's got a big senior class, and combined with the new head coach, they're going to be taking a big recruiting class. So maybe 3 right now, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's at least 25 when it's all said and done. It's going to be a big class. And really look for them to get some tight ends because they're going to need some tight ends. Quarterbacks, they only have 3 on the roster, and some outside linebackers. They need some outside linebackers. That's really what Louisville's going to need in this class. However, like I said, they're going to need a whole lot of players because they have a big senior class. Pittsburgh's 3-man class is just under Louisville's at 72. Now they have an 84 right here right now, and they need to find players that fit, 5 players that are underrated, and 5 players that are passed over. That's just what Pittsburgh needs to do at this point. And they need wide receivers and tight ends. They're going to be low on both positions when the season is over. So try to find some players at both of those positions. And last but not least, we have Syracuse's 3-man class, 74th overall. Now Syracuse had a really good season last year. However, they're going to be replacing their quarterback this year. So can they have another great season? Or are they going to have a drop-off? That's the one thing I think kids are going to look at. When you lose a quarterback, especially as good as what they had, there can be some drop-off. It does happen. Now, they have an 83 average. That's going to go up. And they also have a big senior class. So I do expect them to have a big recruiting class as well because they have that big senior class. And I'm looking for them to look at some tight ends, quarterbacks, offensive linemen, and defensive linemen. Going to be a little low when the season is over. So they really are going to have to figure out, they really are going to have to identify those players and figure out who they want to take. Alright guys, so that was the ACC part of the recruiting ranking. And I'll see you next time.